Good evening. It's past the hour of 7 o'clock. I would like to call to order the Thursday, January 26th Financial Planning Committee meeting to order. Thank you all for coming. John?
So given we are absent a couple of members, do you want to hold off on election of officers to your next meeting?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we can defer that. And then if you want to take up the adoption of the minutes, I would just point out you have 3 sets of minutes. Some are from the last, ending of the meetings of after town meeting last year. Those minutes did go out, and the drafts have been available to the public. So this is just formally adopting those. And then you have the minutes from your December 15th joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen. You do not need to adopt those. Those are the board's minutes. But I did, for the record, want you to have the copy of the meeting minutes from that's a financial trend monitoring and forecasting meeting. So you got 2 sets of minutes to approve tonight if you're so inclined.
Do we do them separately, or? I think we were all at both meetings. So I move to approve the minutes of March 23rd and March 30th of 2022.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of approval? Aye.
Very good. So through the chair, item number 3 on your agenda is the preliminary free cash plan. Again, I'm just including this in here for your reference. This was distributed to you electronically. We also did discuss it at the financial trend monitoring back in December 15th. So in the free cash memo on page 2 of the free cash memo is the table that has the preliminary free cash plan. I just want to remind folks that based on the $2.4 million of free cash that we have from the close of fiscal 2022, so that's fiscal 2022, we're in fiscal 2023, so this is the closeout. The plan is very similar to years past. There's $175,000 that would go into the Appropriations Committee's reserve account. $500,000 goes into the operating budget. That's basically limited to 1% per our free cash policy. Recommending $200,000 goes into stabilization fund so that we can maintain our current ratio of financial reserves of about 8%. And then last but not least, that leaves us approximately a little over $1 million, $1,065,000 for potential pay-as-you-go capital. So as you know, the big success of this free cash policy for us has been since fiscal 12. We've paid about $20 million of pay-as-you-go capital. So basically it's budget surplus left over from the prior fiscal year, and we try to use it as a one-time revenue source. We try to use it for one-time expenses, not the least of which, or the best use of which, is capital. So unlike last year we had $2 million in free cash. This year we have $1 million. So it's more of a typical year that you'll see on average. We have about $1 to $1.5 million in free cash that after we put money in all the other buckets, per the policy, that's what we have to spend on, basically on capital. As you know, we have and will have more than $1 million worth of capital requests. Over the last, roughly almost the last decade, we've been able to fund pretty much all of our equipment replacements. So DPW trucks, police cruisers, some larger apparatus as well, like fire engines in the past. We've had good years with free cash. I think what you're going to see now moving forward, now that we had this sort of bump from the recovery, just like the state had a very good surplus at the close of fiscal 2022, it's because the meal tax came back, the corporate earnings came back. So they got a big bump, and of course nobody knew what was going to happen because of the pandemic, so revenue estimates still remained relatively conservative. So similar to Northborough, so we finished fiscal 21 with over $3 million in free cash, and this year 2.4. So we're seeing that getting back to normal levels. So the free cash that we could spend on pay-as-you-go capital is reduced. However, during the pandemic, you know, we delayed some capital investments, and you're gonna hear from the DPW director in a moment. Some of the lingering impacts of those delays, for instance, money for drainage and culverts and sidewalks, you know, we were planning to start funding on a regular basis to start dealing with some of the deferred maintenance. Those programs were deferred. We still were able to do the equipment that we needed to and the cruisers and things of that nature, but some of the work that we were hoping and headway we're hoping to make in terms of some additional infrastructure, that stuff got, you know, delayed. And so now we have, that was delayed, and we have a little bit of a, as we talked about on December 15th, a bunching up of a number of capital projects. So, you know, we have the big fire station project that's, you know, getting going again, a town hall feasibility, and then we've got some significant roadway work, as well as, Scott will talk about this in a few minutes, new initiatives that came out of the master plan process. So out of the master plan process, we have the downtown revitalization, as well as complete streets and sidewalk work are the priorities of the community. So those, and Scott will talk about those programs in a moment, but, so those are coming in now, adding to the growing list of capital, which is already sort of bunched up, and then we have a reduced funding source in free cash. So it's not critical at the moment, but it does require us to think about how we're going to manage through this little bit of a bubble of capital. One of the big things, it's on your agenda later on, that would go a long way to resolving this bubble is use of American Rescue Plan Act funds. You know, the town got about $4.5 million worth. We've spent very little of that so far, and that's one of the things that we need to talk about as how does those funds come in to help us resolve this bubble? Because we have big projects like the fire station project coming up. That's going to be a debt exclusion bond, no question about it. You can't pay as you go for a $20 million station. And then the smaller equipment replacements, the pickup trucks and things of that, we have a little over $1 million in free cash, as we just discussed in the free cash plan. That'll take care of those. And then we sort of have this middle grouping of projects that have sort of bunched up. And, you know, they're projects that are too expensive to pay free cash for, but in an ideal world, we sure wouldn't want to bond for them, right? So that's why ARPA would be a good funding source for those. But we can talk about that in a little bit. So again, the preliminary free cash plan is something you've seen every year. We already discussed, but I just want to make sure you had it here as a refresher. Really just to remind you that in for fiscal 24, the fiscal year that's coming up, we will we'll only have about $1 million to do pay-as-you-go capital. And we have certainly much more than $1 million worth of projects. So if you page through your packet, you'll come to a memo dated January 25th from DPW Director Scott Charpentier. Scott is next on the agenda through the chair to go over, as he does every year, a project update. This is sort of a primer to talk about all the major initiatives of a capital nature that are ongoing, particularly DPW, and then at a subsequent meeting, Scott will be back to talk about the fiscal 2024 projects that we're looking for. So tonight is really just sort of, you know, get you back up to speed, update you on all the projects that have been previously funded, and I think he's made some incredible headway on those, but without any further ado, through the chair, I'll pass it over to Scott to walk you through his memo.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, we have a memorandum updating the committee on all the projects we have going. There are some new initiatives in there that I'll get into a little more detail on. Other ones that are continuing from past years that I'll give you more quicker updates on. So the first one you see is the pavement management program. We've been actively implementing a pavement management program since 2013. Quickly, it has us evaluating all of the roadway conditions throughout town every other year. We develop a pavement condition index, a PCI grade for all the roads. It's pretty much like a school grade. We started out at a 71, a C- back in 2014. That has improved since then to a 76 here after the 2022 paving program. We try to implement a range of different treatments as far as getting the best bang for your buck. With pavement, you can't do the worst first, you'll never catch up. You need to maintain the roads. Doing preventative maintenance in advance certainly stretches the dollar, but you can't forget the ones that are in dire need. So you'll see the breakup we did last year. Our goal and objective is to hit about 10% of our roads. We have a little over 80 miles. So our goal is to hit a little over 8 miles of roads a year. You'll see the reclamation is a full reconstruction of a roadway. Mill and overlay is more of a treatment of the surface wearing course only. Rubber chip seal seals up the roadway. You've experienced that. It's a 3/8 inch stone. It bears into the rubber underlayment and is a new wearing course. It's very cost effective. It's about a quarter of the cost of a mill and overlay. And then crack fill. One of the most detrimental components of roadway deterioration is water. Water gets in cracks. Water freezes, cracks open up, the roadway blows apart. So crack fill is often the highest mileage we have, but it certainly keeps some of the better roads in good condition longer. You'll see for the first time this year, we have a sidewalk line, 8/10 of a mile of sidewalk. That's required for us to do when we reconstruct a roadway in accordance with our Complete Streets policy that the Board of Selectmen adopted. I'll get into that a little bit later. So when we do a roadway, we can't just do the roadway anymore. There are other considerations that are in accordance with the policy. So again, as always, we are allocated approximately $1.1 million a year. We'll get $300,000 in our operating budget. We'll get a little over $500,000 from the state through Chapter 90, and $300,000 through the capital plan. Last year, we were allocated slightly more than that. I believe it was a little over $400,000 in the capital plan. When we put that money solely to pavement and we address the pavement needs, our grades go up. You'll see on the bottom of page 2 a graph that presents our pavement condition index going back to when we started the program in 2014. You'll see we had a nice incline, a growing incline from 2014 to 2019, and then it dipped in 2020 and 2021. It dipped because of some failing drainage infrastructure. We have one pot of money, the $1.1 million, and out of that pot of money, we do roadway pavement, we do sidewalk pavement, and we do drainage. When we don't spend $1.1 million, you'll see the slope goes down. So the first year you saw in 2020, that was when the Rice Ave culvert failed, and we had to allocate paving money to that. The next one, in 2021, Ridge Road, Lyman Street, and Davis Ave. 2 of those 3 culverts failed, the other third was near failure. We had to replace those. In 2022, we were able to utilize all of the funds allocated to paving to pavement. And you can see how it gained ground from 73.2 to 76 on the PCI. We did have a culvert failure that year, which I'll discuss later. That was the Lincoln Street culvert. But there was a specific capital item at town meeting approved, and those funds went directly toward that culvert.
If I can interrupt for one moment through the chair. I want to remind the committee that, when you're dealing with trying to get a handle on infrastructure, it's a refinement. So, we got a handle on the roadways. Scott will talk in a moment about the master plan for the sidewalks. And then as we were getting a handle on the roadway work, and again, I'm going back to 2012, 2013. This is a long process. Unfortunately, the town had under the several directors back, really, we weren't tracking and taking care of our infrastructure like we do now. And so it was getting a handle on these things. So we got a handle on the roadway surfaces. And as we were doing that, that's when the drainage and the culvert issue started surfacing. And so one of the things that Scott had proposed as we went through these years of dealing with and we're in pretty good shape now, or much better shape in terms of some of the drainage issues with the culverts. However, one of the things that Scott proposed was, well, we can't keep taking money out of the roadway work to do the culverts, because as you can see, what happens to the index. And this is what's so key about having an engineering data-driven decision-making. You see, when you take 300,000, you do a culvert instead of $300,000 worth of roadway work, you see what happens to the pavement condition index. So it's about hitting all of the points. And so Scott brought forward to me a plan to put $200,000 or $300,000 every other year in for drainage so that we could get on a schedule of taking care of drainage. That proposal was one of the things that got, if you recall, during COVID, it got pushed off. So we should have had one, arguably two rounds of drainage funding that has been pushed off. So that's one of the things that will come back, we'll talk about. Because again, that was directly related to the pandemic to get through those two budget cycles where we kept more free cash on hand in case we needed it. So that's just, I want you to put that in the back of your mind as Scott goes through the balance of his memo.
Thank you, John. That's actually a good segue into my next comment about drainage. So culverts are easy to see. There's a pipe at each end. It fails, you get a big hole in the road, you gotta fix it. Now, there's other drainage infrastructure out there, catch basins, manholes, pipes, and discharges. Nobody sees those, nobody knows about them until something bad happens. We have some neighborhoods where there's significant drainage issues. I believe, Mr. Chairman, you received some correspondence regarding the Aspet Hill neighborhood.
Yes, sir.
That neighborhood suffered 3 substantial sinkholes 4 years ago. 4 years ago now, my goodness. Yes, ma'am. We went out there, repaired them, and they were repeated sinkholes in the same, the failures were very, very similar in appearance at the surface. So we went out, we did a full drainage inspection of all the pipes, video inspected every pipe, every manhole. It turns out it's a systemic problem in that development. It's either a materials problem with the concrete pipe, or in my opinion, it's a construction problem. The contractor just didn't build it well. Those things are unseen until they're seen, and when they are seen, they're very costly. So part of our evaluation of roadways is not just, that one's in bad shape, let's fix it, that one's okay, let's extend its life. It's what's underneath as well. We've always taken a holistic approach to pavement, because underneath we got water and sewer. And we know what our water pipes are like, we know what our sewer pipes are like. You know, we're in the midst of our I&I program, and I'll discuss that later. Drainage has not been looked at. So we look at the drainage on these roadways before we go up there and we pave them. So when you drive up Aspet Hill, you'll see those roads are in very poor condition. They heave a lot because of the water in the subbase due to failing drainage. We can't pave that neighborhood for $1 million if we have $1 million worth of drainage problems underneath. So having something in the capital plan every other year to start at the bottom of the hill in that example and do $300,000 of drainage pipe repair, the next year you pave it, the next year another 3, the next year you pave it, you can chip away at an entire neighborhood or a substantial problem that exists, like Aspet Hill.
And that's a unique situation where, due to the construction, the whole neighborhood is experiencing, we don't see that generally. Culverts, as Scott said, we have a culvert inventory, we kind of know right where we are on those, and we've caught up with the worst of them. Just think about it, as over the same time frame that we did the pavement management plan, we replaced the culvert on Otis Street, we did Fisher Street, we did Church Street, which was a $2 million, so they say it's a culvert, I say it's a bridge, but Church Street, and as he said, Lyman, Ridge. So we've made really, really good progress, and we've dealt with the biggest culverts that are the most expensive. We still have more. How many do we have in total?
75.
75 in total, but they tend to be small. They're not all Church Street or Otis Street. Those are basically small bridges. But we've gotten a good handle and made great headway there, and we would normally be doing, drainage projects where they were needed. We do have Aspet Hill as sort of a unique thing that popped up, that whole neighborhood because of poor construction, no fault of the town, this is the contractor, that neighborhood is an issue. But that was one of the reasons why Scott proposed putting, every other year of cycle of doing, just specifically for drainage to get caught up on that. But that was delayed because of the pandemic, so.
For example, my preference is not to wait till a culvert fails to replace it. We know conditions of some of our culverts are poor. There's a double barrel culvert on the Brigham Street at the golf course. They're huge, they're 6-foot diameter pipes, they're still round, they're rotting and they're rusting, but they're still round, and they're in a condition right now where they could be slip lined. Slip lining is a lot less costly than cut and replace. This periodic funding mechanism would allow us to slip line that for, you know, a quarter of the price than replacing, so. We're trying to take a programmatic approach to preventative repair as opposed to, you know, responsive.
I just think it's important for somebody who maybe is watching at home, understands, like, this hasn't been, hey, nobody's been minding the fort, and all these problems have stacked up and we're waiting for stuff to fail. You know, we began really in earnest going back to 2012, 2013, where we've been systematically assessing, grading, and prioritizing roadways and drainage and sidewalks. But like any infrastructure, the number one need in New England here, hands down, it's infrastructure. I just was at the MMA conference in Boston. That's all anybody talked about, the need for more Chapter 90 transportation aid to deal with aging infrastructure in general. Again, I think we have a better handle on it. You know, knowing where the problems are, being able to prioritize, and then matching it up with a funding source. We've done that really well with roadways. We've done it pretty good getting culverts caught up. Sidewalks is sort of the next phase, and again, in terms of priority, sidewalks, but then we do have a couple of unique drainage, large drainage issues that have popped up during that process, so. But I don't want people to think that we're just now getting around to looking at this or waiting for things to sink into the ground. When, you know, going back, and this is before I even started here, and I've been here for 20 years, we had a long period of time where we really weren't assessing and putting the proper investment in. And as Scott said, since 2015, we put a plan together, put 1.1 million minimally into this infrastructure. And that's why we're in good shape. We could be in better shape with more funding, but we're in good shape. Had we not done that, had we not acted and put these plans in place when we did, the problem would be so insurmountable. You'd be doing what you're seeing some towns do. I'm not going to name names, but to have a $14 million debt exclusion to deal with the backlog. So not only are we not there, with a little bit more help from the state in terms of increased transportation funding, you know, we had another, $300,000 or $400,000 a year from the state. We could start systematically dealing with drainage and sidewalks and be on a really good trajectory. So that gap isn't insurmountable, but it is significant still, so.
Scott, on Route 20, Main Street, is the state's responsibility inclusive of the curbs?
Yes,
It is.
yeah, curbs, sidewalks, guardrails, and the intersections.
Okay, thank you.
So when we do our drive around every other year, I always have our consultant capture some additional data. We've talked about it in the past, we've grabbed curbs, guardrails, pavement markings. 2019, we grabbed sidewalks. We did another drive around in 2022. I wanted to see where the sidewalks have gone over the past 3 years. Due to some funding issues that I just discussed, we weren't able to do any sidewalk construction. So we reassessed the sidewalks. I'm now on page 3 of the memorandum. So the reassessment of the sidewalk, we're in the process of developing a sidewalk management plan, which is parallel to the pavement management plan. It'll culminate with funding scenarios as well as capital improvement plan, 3-year capital improvement plans at the end. You'll see in the middle, there's a graph very similar to the pavement graph. This is the sidewalk graph, right? You'll see the different levels of funding. These are arbitrary values that were just selected to have something graphical to show what order of magnitude of funding is needed to maintain our current condition of sidewalk. So our current sidewalk condition, again, it's like a school grade, it's a 72. In order to keep it as a C-, we're looking at $200,000 a year for sidewalks. Now, as I indicated earlier, with the Complete Streets program and the policy having been adopted by the Board of Selectmen, we now rebuild sidewalks when we rebuild roads. 2022's pavement program included reconstruction of Warren, Stratton, and Edmonds, other roads as well, but those 3 were sidewalks. And that was that 0.8 miles I described to you earlier. That work was done this year. We're gonna be continuing to do that in years going forward. We have some roadways we're proposing for calendar 23 They have sidewalks, we're gonna reconstruct them, we're gonna build new sidewalks. So those dollars come directly out of the pavement money. You know, last year it was $80,000, this year it's probably gonna be about $90,000 for sidewalks, direct association with the roadways we're doing.
The long and short of this, gentlemen, is based on the policies and the priorities of the community, with complete streets and wanting more sidewalks and better quality sidewalks, is our pavement dollars are not gonna go as far. There needs to be a recurring increase for this infrastructure.
Was there proposed funding, or just, of course not? Yeah.
So
Okay.
where we have,
From the state, you mean, or?
No, I mean, this is all great, and, you know, unicorns and rainbows, but has anyone come up with how it's actually going to be funded?
Yeah, so, you know, as you know, part of the first step is to get your hands around the scope of what you're talking about. And here, a comprehensive sidewalk analysis was done. Every single sidewalk was inventoried and graded. And so we know we have, and this shouldn't surprise anybody, it was 1.5, now it's 2.1 million with escalation of existing sidewalks that need repair. Some of those will be taken care of, as Scott said, through the pavement management. As we do the roadway, we're required now under the policy to replace the sidewalks. But as part of the capital plan, just like you have the pavement management dollar figure in the capital plan each year, we're starting to work in drainage and sidewalks. Funding sources can be state aid, it can be free cash, it can be bonds. So at some point, you know, we need to determine what is going to be the recurring funding source, so that just like on the pavement management, we have 1.1 going in every year. We know what that's gonna do to the condition index, right? We can forecast that. We've now sort of identified that if you want to not lose ground on your sidewalks, you're looking at about $200,000 a
So
year.
is this an additional 200? Or
Yes.
So that's not coming out of the 1.1, this is an additional
Correct.
200
Mike?
that we would need to find.
yeah, my goal and objective would be to have the pavement dollars stay the same or slightly escalate based on costs in the capital plan. Alternating years, drainage sidewalk, drainage sidewalk, drainage sidewalk. Same thing we do with the trucks. Big truck, little truck, big truck, little truck. Little truck years, you get a piece of equipment, so there's not as much undulation in those expenditures to try to level it out. That's my, I won't say a dream, but that would be wonderful.
Just as a refresher, as you know, the number one legislative priority for this town for the last 4 or 5 years has been lobbying the state for additional Chapter 90 funds. So Chapter 90 funds is a formula based on road miles and population that we get a little over $500,000 a year. Statewide, that's 200 million. So 200 million statewide gives Northborough about $500,000 of roadway monies from the state every year. That's part of the 1.1 that we spend. We're doing a pretty hard lobby to get the state to increase it to 300 million. You've heard me talk about this for years. If the state would increase it by another 100 million, we'd pick up about another $300,000. So that 300,000, when you look at, you know, we're talking about every other year, sidewalk, drainage, right? That would get us pretty close to there. So that's why we've been so heavily focused on getting the state to increase that funding. It is, by the way, it is the number one priority of the Mass Municipal Association as well. We just had their conference in last weekend, and I actually presented to that conference the Fiscal Policy Committee's priorities, and the item that generated the most debate and discussion or support was increasing that Chapter 90 funding. So again, if the state would just get there, they've gotten there every 2 times, a little extra money with a surplus, and then they pull back, right? It needs to be consistent, and it just so happens if that would come up, that would take care of most of the gap for us to get on a solid spending plan for drainage and sidewalks. But, you know, absent that, or in addition to that, we still need to, on an annual basis, come up with, we need to come up with a little bit more money, because costs are escalating. You know, $1 million doesn't buy what it did, 5, 6 years ago. I think everybody knows that, time value.
So the next item, continuing on the sidewalk topic is the complete streets at the bottom of page 3. It starts in earnest on page 4. I'll give you a brief description of what complete streets is. It's a Mass DOT policy and mechanism to provide positive transportation for all different modes. That includes cars, bicycles, pedestrians, mobility impaired, and transit. We're not a heavy transit community, but we check all the other boxes. The process for complete streets, Board of Selectmen adopts a policy, which has been done. The community and staff put together a prioritization plan. There's a lot of public outreach associated with that. You pick 20 or 30 projects based on need and community input. Projects can range from bike lanes on Bartlett Street to multi-use trails through the woods to, just sidewalk gap closures. We have known gaps. For example, when we reconstructed Allen Street 6 years ago, we did so in a manner that we could accommodate a sidewalk on the north side, on the south side between East Main Street and Hudson. It's a gap. You walk down Hudson Street, you can't get to the fields. So you might as well just connect up, get up to East Main Street, get to the fields, get to downtown PD. It's a logical gap that should be filled. Complete Streets fills those gaps. They can rebuild sidewalks when the sidewalk is not compliant, meaning it's too narrow, or the wheelchair ramps aren't compliant. They don't just rebuild sidewalks that are fine. There needs to be a deficiency there. So that prioritization plan was developed. We went to the Board of Selectmen. We had public charrettes. It's been submitted to Mass DOT. It has been approved in draft form. We have a couple comments. I'm actually going to be submitting them tomorrow, the responses, and we expect it to be finally approved in the next week or two.
By the way, in your packet, you have the memo that Scott's referring to, which is summary, but in your packet is the full complete streets, everything about that. The full presentation was made to the board, the list of all the projects, how the process, the policy, everything is in there.
It starts with
The only thing I'd stress to you again is it's a moving target for us for this infrastructure, for roadways, sidewalks, and drainage to some extent, because while we've been trying to deal with the known needs, right, out of the master plan has come a higher elevated need. People want more sidewalks. They want complete streets with bike lanes and all these other amenities. So what it's done is it's raised the cost of the project. So even though we've made good progress, the service level demands have been raised by virtue of adopting the complete streets program. Means the roadways that we do are that much more expensive. They come out nicer, and it's what people want. But again, it just means your roadway dollars aren't going to go as far. So as we've worked on, really the nuts and bolts pieces of the infrastructure, out of the master plan again has come a higher level service demand from the town, which is fine. It just adds to that funding gap that we need to close. So Chapter 90 from the state's a piece of it, but make no mistake about it, the town's going to need to identify and devote more money if we're going to reach these community stated goals.
So my limited experience with it is over on Donald Lynch Boulevard, which I'm on constantly. Of course, I see more accidents. I've never seen a bike or a pedestrian. But is there any data on the amount of increase in accidents with these type roadways?
There would be data available. I haven't looked into it. Mass DOT maintains accident databases, and now that there's a lot of communities in the area that are complete streets and have bike lanes, for example, Bartlett Street where it turns into Forest, there's bike lanes in Marlboro. It's a logical connectivity to have bike lanes from Marlboro down Bartlett Street to at least connect up to the trail and preferably to the high school, because that's a good portal location for cyclists to go and congregate and get to the trails. But I haven't correlated that data though, but it is available, Michael. The Complete Streets program offers $500,000 in grants for construction, not design, only construction. They don't fund design over a 5-year period. It's not a lot of money. But when you're talking about building new sidewalks, and I've discussed this before, you're often talking about new closed drainage, easements, moving utilities. There's a lot of stuff associated with it. Grading is often a big problem, You know, when you have a nice, like, there's a gap on Davis Street, between Indian Meadow and Hamilton. That would be great. You can come out of Indian Meadow neighborhood, cross Davis, walk down Hamilton, boom, you're in Northgate. There's a gap there. You think about the topography there, that's right around Thayer. The yards are dead flat. So if you put a sidewalk there, it's a 6-foot dam in front of somebody's yard that used to drain toward the road. That's a challenge for the residents. I don't want a massive puddle in front of my yard, so you need to make those accommodations, and that requires design efforts, easements, and a lot of well-thought-out plans.
And drainage work.
And drainage. One of the benefits of the Complete Streets timing for the community is that, as John indicated, our master plan is complete, but we also have a master plan implementation committee with a focus on a downtown master plan. And there are certainly Complete Street eligible projects in the downtown where these grant funds will help substantially. You know, having a sidewalk from Assabet Playground up Gale, down Monroe to meet up on Monroe, so you can get to the town common, that would be wonderful. That's a good Complete Streets project. Making the Blake and Pierce Street a little more pedestrian-friendly by the 3-Wharf. Pedestrian scale lighting, some defined curbs as opposed to a sea of pavement by, by the pizza joint and the old doggy den. That's a nice project. That's a Complete Streets project that will really help the downtown.
But here's the kicker. So it's great so we've identified through this process, again, more projects and expanded projects and adding sidewalks in. We got a $2.1 million backlog. And now this Complete Streets is adding another, $4.5 million worth of projects, those 25 projects that are identified. It's another $4.5 million roughly, of which we have access to about $500,000 of grant funding. So, you know, again, it's about prioritizing and where do you want to focus, and a big focus is on the downtown at the moment, but closing those gaps around the schools and so forth. A great program, but anytime you get into this, again, you got $500,000 over 5 years, but you're identified, almost $5 million worth of projects. So, trying to balance it all out.
Next project is relatively quick, literally and figuratively. The Lincoln Street Culvert Project, again, that was funded last year at town meeting as a capital item. We sought out other grant funds for it. There are challenges when it comes to river crossing grants and ecological restoration grants, and that their requirements are often preventative to simple culvert replacements. This project was done extremely fast. It was right at the entrance to Lincoln Street Elementary School. There was a very long lead time for materials. This is when the supply chain for all metals was coming to a halt. The contractor was required to finish the work before school started. And if you look at the first line on page 5, construction began on August 1st and it was complete on the 25th. That's not a lot of time to spend $370,000. They worked closely with us. They worked closely with a consultant. Eversource was essential in completing that project. There's a 3-inch high-pressure gas main that was encountered at an elevation we didn't expect, and Eversource was there to help get this thing done. So that was albeit not a lot of people saw a lot about it, that was a very challenging project, and without a good team, that would have failed epically. We were also, you'll see in the last line of that bullet, we were awarded a $50,000 earmark from the state. They buried that in their budget, and it passed. We haven't seen it. We will, eventually. But $50,000 certainly helps. It knocks it down to $320,000.
It dealt with some portion of the escalation from, believe it or not, when the project was approved, and as quickly as it was done, we saw probably $50,000, $75,000 worth of escalation in that project.
And this was
that small window.
This was funded for $300,000 at town meeting. So the $70,000 came out of the operating budget. We're getting 50 back, but that'll go to free cash. So it's still $20,000 more than town meeting appropriation.
But just remember now, that graph of our pavement condition index, why did it was going down slight, and then it popped up? Because we did $300,000 of drainage work, not out of that under a separate appropriation at town meeting, because we had the free cash. So that's how this, you know, you get the drainage done and you can stay on track with your pavement management. But you're gonna need, we need to come up with about another $300,000 every year in the capital plan somewhere, somehow, to get on a good upward trajectory on drainage and sidewalks.
Sure you're all familiar with the pickleball courts down at Ellsworth McAfee Park. Those are complete. They were a bit of a challenge to complete. Again, this was due to supply chain issues. When you go out there, you'll see there are 3 concrete pads with no benches. The benches just came in last week. So the supply chain is still a problem, and was literally a problem here when it comes to chain link fence. But we were able to get it open and commissioned and available for use in time for the Be Well event down there on June 22nd. The community's very happy with it. It's actively used is an understatement for that facility. It was a unique project site in that it was a very small rectangle, and if you were down there during construction, the limits of work were maybe 10 feet beyond where the fence lines are. The contractor was very neat, orderly, understood that pavilion is rented out by families and civic groups, and you cannot interfere with them. And we did not hear a single concern or complaint from any of the users of the pavilion. The playground is complete and was commissioned before, it was the Friday before Memorial Day. Thank goodness. I was literally standing at the concrete waiting for it to cure. It did. We got lucky on this project when it comes to the supply chain. We went through an alternate approach to procurement. We purchased all of the play equipment directly through a state bid list. The town did, well in advance of the pandemic. It wasn't because I saw it coming. It was just DPW luck. So we bought everything exactly what the community wanted, and then when we bid it out, that's when the prices escalated. That's where we ended up having to cut some items like chain link fence, some gates, some of the smaller amenities. The selectmen were kind enough to award some ARPA money to put those amenities back into the project. They weren't critical to the operation, but you don't want to spend $500,000 on a playground and have a bent, ruined, rusty chain link fence around it. So there was some improvements from the ARPA funds there. In addition, we had to cut some gates out of the pickleball courts, specifically in between the courts. People playing pickleball, you want your ball going to the other guy's court. So we had gates in the bid, we had to take it out because we didn't have the funds. The selectmen also used ARPA funds there to bolster that project. And those gates also came in last week. So it took quite a while. But both of those projects will be complete in the next few weeks. The most exciting project for everybody in the community is the Water and Sewer SCADA project, Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition Program. That's what SCADA stands for. It is a closed network computer system that is highly recommended by water and sewer utility operators to bolster cybersecurity and provide far more efficient and resilient operations. A water sewer operator can be at home with an iPad, receive an alarm that a pump has failed, open up his iPad, turn pump 1 off, turn pump 2 on, then put his boots on, get in his truck and go to the pump station to see what's going on. As opposed to right now, where you get the alarm, you get up, you get dressed, you go out there and you realize what is flowing out of the door. So it's from an operational perspective, it's fantastic. From an emergency perspective, it helps out in fire prevention. Large fire occurs like R&K. Operators can open up the MWRA valve remotely, instantly, and supply all the water we need to fight the fire, as well as keep the tanks at adequate level for pressure. It provides that level of security. The reporting side of it is critical as well. You receive far more data when it comes to pump operations, pump efficiency. Right now, you go to the pump station once a day, you put a little notes in your chart book, and then if you have the data capacity to look at 12 pages of data and analyze it in your mind and come up with issues with the pumps, good for you. Now we have that all on a computer, it's automatically updated, so we see in advance that an impeller is wearing, that pump is not supplying sufficient head, and we need to replace that impeller before there's a problem. It's a two-phase project. Town meeting authorized $500,000 of funding 2 years ago for it. That's well underway. Again, supply chain has slowed down. Procurement of computers, the buckload of computers and chips on this thing, it's been hard to get them. We submitted 2 earmark requests, one through Senator Warren, one through Jim McGovern's office. And if you look on page 7, at the top, you'll see that we received a $491,000 federal earmark in the omnibus bill that was passed by the president, signed by the president recently. That covers 80% of the cost for phase 2, the SCADA. Phase 1 was the bones of it, the 2 base stations where all the hard data gets collected, and then the really critical stuff. Hudson Street Pump Station, acid bit tank, MWRA valve. Like that's it. Those are the things we need. The other pieces, Town Hall Pump Station, Church Street, West Main, all these other pump stations, they're very important. We didn't have the funds for it. We do now. So you'll see the next time I come before you to discuss the details of FY24 capital budget, the capital projects, will be the 20% match for this $491,000 earmark.
Great job by Scott and consultants putting that, because we had to put that together to submit it. And we throw a lot of spaghetti at the wall at the federal and the state level. At the state level, we got $50,000 for Lincoln Street, but at the federal level, we got about $500,000 for this project. This is grant money that we're not paying back, so this will reduce. In this case, it's money that the ratepayers won't have to come up with. So just great job on Scott and his team's part to get that.
The Reservoir Dam removal project is ongoing. Removal of a dam is a painfully long permitting process. Very, very long. And it unfortunately is becoming a little more painful with some recent regulation changes. Things were moving along very well. One of the permit processes you have to go through is with MEPA, the Massachusetts Environmental Protection Agency. When it's a dam removal project, they often view it as an ecological restoration project, meaning it's a benefit, and they sort of grease the skids for you and allow you a more streamlined permitting approach. There was a regulation change that was promulgated in January and will be effective February 6th or something like that, first week of February. That changes the playing field a bit. One of the part of the dam is located in Shrewsbury. Shrewsbury has an environmental justice community in it. Because it has an environmental justice community in it, there is another level of permitting that is required. We're gonna try to circumvent it and work our way around it in hopes that the state sees that it doesn't make any sense. There's this much dam in Shrewsbury and nothing affects anybody in the town. But by the letter of the regulation, we would be required to file an environmental impact report. And if anybody's gone through a MEPA process, an EIR is a very long, uncomfortable, costly, and painful process that gives you the same result as if you did most of the time. But we're gonna work with DEP and MEPA in hopes that reasonable minds prevail.
Just so people understand, this is a dam that hasn't been used for many, many years, was owned by the Water Enterprise Fund in Northborough from like the 1950s. So everybody's like, what dam are you talking about that you're gonna remove? It's not in Northborough, but we own it. So, and we now have an obligation, because it's a high-risk dam, to either repair it or remove it. So we're going down the path of removal, and Scott's done a great job of getting grants to pay for most of that process to date. And we're hopeful when it comes time to actually do the physical dam removal work that will be in line for some additional grants. We've done everything that we can to position ourselves well. We're a municipal vulnerabilities community, so we've gone through that planning process. So hopefully we'll be coming back with a grant to do the lion's share of that work.
And the state has multiple grant programs for dam removal. They all require a 20% match. MVP, as John indicated, is one of them for dam removal, directly related to climate change. Climate change impacts dams, especially those that are considered high hazard, because you have faster runoff. It makes that dam even more vulnerable to failure. The DCR has a dam and seawall program. They're the ones who funded us for $168,000 of grant money for the design and permitting phase. They also have a construction portion, for a construction program for grants, 80-20 again. And then there's the Rivers Way program that has ecological restoration grants to reestablish riverways. So where you pull the dam, you now have a big swamp. You want to have a meandering stream like there was before the dam was there. They help fund that piece of it. There's a lot of pots of money out there. We just need to get through the minefield that is permitting.
And if anybody wants a dam, I'll sell it to you for $1.
That includes the general public watching.
Yes, anybody wants a dam, we'll sell it to you for $1.
The next are some projects that are in the works. That you'll see on the top of page 8, we have the dog park. That was funded at town meeting with CPA funds for a siting study. The siting study has been completed. We worked with our consultant to identify 4 potential locations for the dog park. Went through a public input process to vet out the different sites. Did some bird's eye view analysis of the pros and cons of each one of the sites. And went before the Board of Selectmen, who endorsed the property on Boundary Street. When you drive down Boundary Street from Northborough, you go over the Aspet River. On the right-hand side, there's a little dirt parking lot at a trailhead. This location is about 400 feet past that on Boundary Street, across the street from the sewer treatment plant. The land is owned by the town. The land behind it is owned by the sewer department. And then the land adjacent to it is the Department of Conservation and Recreation. There's one duplex next to it that's a housing authority, and across the street's a sewer treatment plant. It's a good location. The current project includes design drawings up to permitting, but not permit submission. The next step is to go for funding for final design and construction. We're seeking 2 mechanisms to fund that. One is the Stanton Foundation. They award grants for dog parks. They want to build 10 a year. That's what they do. Our town planner, planning director, Lori Connors, her former community, was awarded one of the first Stanton grants to construct a dog park in Millbury. She's very well versed in the program. She just submitted an application to fund 25% of $25,000 of design services. We can,
Yeah, if I can, just in your packet, again, this is the director's summary. In your packet is that full submission to the Stanton Foundation with every gory bit of detail you may or may not ever want to know about dog parks, but right down to the deed, minutes to the meeting. So that's in your packet if you want to peruse that at your leisure. We're not going to walk you through it, but you have all of that information in there.
So the Stanton Foundation has 2 grant structures. One is for design, caps at $25,000. The other one is construction, caps at $200,000. Our goal is to seek funds for both of them. And we're going to the CPC, or we're going to town meeting requesting CPA funds in the amount of $347,000, assuming the CPC supports that article. That would fund full construction of the project. The expectation is that construction would begin after when the new fiscal year starts, July 1, in hopes that it could be opened up by the fall. Again, that depends on materials. There's thousands of feet of fence, so I don't know how long it takes to get fenced nowadays, but the project is progressing well. There will be additional public input sessions when it comes to the public hearings for environmental permitting. There will be a Conservation Commission filing. The public has an opportunity to participate in that process. Next one is the Brigham Street Burial Ground beautification. That was funded fully last year at town meeting. The $137,000 of CPA funds. The bid package is draft complete. I received it beginning of last week, had a couple comments. We're gonna move some things around with some bid alternates just to make sure the bidding environment doesn't blow the thing up. If you drive by it, you'll see a bunch of trees with ribbons on them. Those are the ones we're saving. I didn't have enough ribbons to tie around all the dead ones that we're removing, so I did it the exact opposite. So don't think I'm crazy and I'm pulling all these healthy trees down. But again, to remove all the trees, grind the stumps, loam it, power rake the whole thing, amend the topsoil so it's nice, hydroseed it. And it's gonna be a nice, a granite post with welded chain between. So it'll be similar to Town Common, but not the rails. Rails don't get that long, they're very expensive because you have to have more posts. But it'll be nice, and the expectation is the bids will be complete by February, and the contractor can get out there and start working as soon as the ground's not muddy. The last physical project we have on the list is the Senior Center Accessible Trail. Again, last year, town meeting, CPA funds were allocated for design services to develop a trail around the Senior Center property. On page 10, the top of it, you'll see the sketch of where the trail goes. The goal and objective is to have 2 accessible loops and 1 connective loop. So when you look at the map, there's a kind of a dark loop that goes around the pond. That will be wheelchair accessible, including out to the peninsula, where there'll be a seating vista. The gray oblong you see going to the left, that goes all the way up to the Edmonds Hill Trail, that is not accessible. If anybody's been up there, you know, that's far too steep for a wheelchair. And then the lower loop that kind of goes off the page and around the parking lot, that again will be wheelchair accessible. So there's a short one that goes from the senior center kind of around the parking lot but into the woods and comes back out. It's a relatively short, really level one. The one around the pond is much longer, a little more challenging, but again, wheelchair accessible. And then for those that want to vigorously hike up the mountain and back, there's that one that hooks up to Edmonds Hill Trails. So that project is well underway, the survey is done, the design is nearly permit ready. Again, we'll be going to the Conservation Commission due to the proximity of the pond, so there'll be public input available at the Conservation Commission. And that $370,000 request to CPA at town meeting, hopefully will be supported by the CPC. So we can get to construction along the same timelines that I just described the dog park, in hopes that this thing can be up and operational when the leaves change. I did submit a very small grant application, like $5,000, to the AARP. They have a grant program that supports activities for seniors. There's a lot of wayfinding signs here to kind of give you information about trails and nature and things like that. It's about $5,200 worth of signs. I submitted a grant application 2 weeks ago to the AARP in hopes that they'll fund those signs. They get a little, a little publicity on it, but on the signs, and it'd be nice. It's a nice feel-good grant, and it's an appropriate use for that kind of money. The last is the ADA accessibility. It's not a physical project. The American with Disabilities Act requires communities to have self-evaluations and transition plans. What it is you have an architect that comes out, evaluates all your buildings, your operations, and your grounds, and identifies where there are accessibility barriers. For example, stairs and not a ramp, that's an easy one. A door that's recessed inside a hallway, that's not an easy one. They identify those items, and then they'll put a transition plan together on how you can make those items accessible. They could be as complicated as an elevator, or as simple as have a bell. You ring the bell, you open the door, somebody with mobility issues can come in. Or you're at a meeting and somebody is deaf, you simply have a narration on a screen so they can read it on an iPad. Very simple things like that, or very complicated things like elevators. But it's an important plan to have, the transition plan, because it allows us to be eligible for grants to eliminate those barriers and address those barriers. We were awarded a grant just under $50,000 to develop the plan. We're in the process of hiring an architect to do that with us. We actually have a meeting tomorrow morning with an architect for a scoping session. It's a need that the community's had. We've applied for the grant before, haven't been awarded. I'm really happy that we are, because it really opens up a lot of doors to give the community better access to our facilities, and also gives us access to funds to make those changes. That's my memo.
So if I may, just for, again, anybody who may be viewing at home or watching the meeting, one of the things that we stress is, it doesn't always make sense to people. If there's a roadway or a sidewalk that's failed in their neighborhood, yet we're spending, $370,000 to put a paved trail through the woods, okay? They say, well, why shouldn't you take care of my issue first? It often comes down to funding sources. So the CPC funds can't be used to do that sidewalk. CPC, Community Preservation Act funds, are affordable housing, historic preservation, or recreation projects. By law, it's restricted to those. Again, you'll see sometimes that we'll be doing things, maybe we're adding a sidewalk in where there's a gap. And people may say, well, why are you building a new sidewalk when I have an existing sidewalk that's failed? And it's because that's grant eligible and your sidewalk isn't. So that's confusing for folks when you see, if you have a drainage problem or a roadway that's failed or a sidewalk that needs to be replaced. Holistically, and you guys get this, it depends on the funding source, but it really comes down to, tax dollars, our capital improvement plan, Community Preservation Act, or various grants. So when we prioritize projects, again, even though you may have a project that's arguably a higher need, if you can get another project over here done concurrently with a grant, even though it's not the same priority, we grab the grant money and you do the project. So when people hear about all the money that's being spent on these various projects, like you're spending all this money on a dog park, but why can't you fix my road? We can't spend the money that we're spending on the dog park on your road because it's not legal. CPC can only be spent on those three buckets. So it's important for people to realize that. That's why we stress, with the capital improvement plan that we do, that's mostly local tax dollars, free cash. That's where we're focused on our building, our equipment, our infrastructure that we can't get grants for. And even then, like the SCADA system, we got a $500,000 grant. Why? Federal government wants our core infrastructure to be, for cybersecurity reasons, to be safe. And that system is standalone. So from a cybersecurity, that was incentivized through the grant. So we couldn't get that $500,000. We can't use that to do sidewalks or drainage with. So that's just how the system works. And again, we're talking about this broad range of projects. And again, the grants are designed, and the CPC is designed to incentivize, those types of projects, because prior to the Community Preservation Act, when would you ever get around to spending money on a handicapped accessible trail or a dog park? You wouldn't, because unless all your roadways were in perfect shape, all your buildings were in perfect shape, all your sidewalks are in perfect shape. So these programs and these laws are put in place to incentivize specific projects. And you can't take the money for one and put it to another. So it's important for folks to understand that. So, I know it's a lot of information, but again, I think Scott does a great job of summarizing it. And then again, we attach all the gory detail. You can get into as much of it as you like. And we are, I believe, putting the packets to your meetings up online so people can see the documents that we're referring to, if they would so choose to. So, all right.
Nicely done.
No, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Scott.
It's got a lot of stuff cooking. Yeah.
Look forward to seeing you again.
Next item, item 5, the American Rescue Plan Act.
So speaking of grant funding, I'm referring to the one-page handout that I gave you guys with a little bit of handwritten notes at the bottom. So as part of the federal assistance pertaining to the pandemic, the American Rescue Plan Act was funding that came directly to the town. It's overseen by the Department of Treasury. Northborough received, and I say received in past tense, so we have the money in hand, $4,516,184. That's what we have received. And this money is under the purview and control of the Board of Selectmen. It does not need to go to town meeting. It was designed to be responsive so that communities could deal with the impacts of the pandemic. So originally, this was very heavily restricted how you could use and what you could spend this money on. In January of last year, the final rule came out. It basically says if you're receiving as a community less than $10 million, you can more or less spend it on anything that you see fit. And it was an attempt to acknowledge the fact that, it's not just that we had to spend money to run clinics or to buy remote software and laptops to continue our continuity of operation plans, but it's acknowledgement of the fact that the hotels weren't open, the restaurants weren't open, major sources of revenue for the towns and the cities shrunk. And so everybody either had to cut back programs or postpone projects, which we did. And so this money ultimately was green-lighted for us to use it for pretty much anything the town would need to use it for. So to date, we've spent a little bit of money on, and this is on the one-page sheet that I gave you, some initial drainage repairs to the Proctor roof, not the full repairs, but just some things that needed to be done immediately. Scott, our DPW director, already covered, $20,000 for the Assabet Park fence, $18,000 for pickleball. Those projects were out to bid, and the price escalation and the supply chain kind of short-circuited those. The town did, or the Board of Selectmen did approve $100,000 for a community wellness program. Again, trying to get people back out, that sense of community back. A lot of mental health wellness programs for seniors and kids in the schools. So that was $100,000. There was originally, if you remember from town meeting, some money for a housing authority project, but the grant didn't come through, so that money wasn't appropriated. The only thing that's not listed on here is the board at their a meeting in, I believe, November, released $15,000 to bolster the community meals program. This is the free meals on Wednesdays. They were having trouble fundraising, and needs were up, and so the Board of Selectmen released money. So it leaves roughly, $4.3 million in ARPA funds that, as we sit here today, have not been allocated towards anything. So back in June or July, staff put together a memo, which is in your packet. June 15th is 2022 is the memo. Put together an attempt to try to, say these are some of the things that the staff believes we should be funding with these ARPA monies. And a big part of it was the argument that we have these existing plans. We have a master plan of development. We have a capital improvement plan. These are the things, particularly the capital improvement plan, that was impacted by the pandemic, where projects were delayed. And so one of the recommendations was that a good portion of these ARPA funds arguably should be used towards capital. Plus, anytime you invest in your infrastructure and your buildings, your infrastructure, you're going to reap benefits down the road. If you take care of a roadway now, that saves you more money down the road. So sitting here today, there's roughly about $4.3 million left. So 3 projects, and at your next meeting, we're going to give you the summary of the project requests for fiscal 2024. I'll spare you the suspense. There's not enough money on a pay-as-you-go basis. We have, as I said when we started, about $1 million in free cash, okay? We have in the capital budget, right now, the Proctor School roof, which we were hoping to get an MSBA grant for, half of that roof. That roof is about $1.7 million now. The Massachusetts School Building Authority, because of the pandemic and the inflationary impacts, has suspended their program. They're not issuing any more grants for the accelerated repair. Not this year and not next year. That's a direct result of the pandemic, because they've approved a bunch of projects that are already out to bid or under construction, and those projects saw significant escalation. So they're holding off future grants to deal with the impacts of the pandemic on the projects they have now. That means that the town of Northborough has the Proctor School roof for $1.7 million that needs to be done now, and there is zero chance of a grant this year or next year. So that project needs to be done. That's not something we're gonna pay cash for, so if we don't use ARPA funds for that, it means we're gonna have to bond it. The other one is the fire engine. That was $800,000 back in June. That escalation now is now $900,000 for that fire engine. Again, we have $1 million in pay-as-you-go funding for this year's capital budget. So if we are going to do that fire engine and we need to do it, we're either gonna have to issue debt to bond it or use ARPA funds. The third project is the DPW tight tank. This is like a wash bay. We can't allow the salts when they wash off these vehicles and the oils to go into the septic system. So we're not under consent order yet, but, by DEP, but they're very clear that, from a regulatory standpoint, they want that project done, or they may force us to do it or fine us if we don't. And this has been something that's been in the capital plan, as you know, for at least 4 or 5 years, and that moved up, and that's ready to be funded. So those 3 projects total to $3,075,000. So here's where we sit today. We have other needs in the capital budget. You know, we're gonna do $300,000 or more for the roadway. We have police cruisers. We've got some work around the walkway at the Z School. We have several pieces of DPW equipment that need to be replaced. So, so those projects would quickly eat up the $1 million, and those are the ones that are appropriate for us to pay as you go. These 3 projects, there's no funding. They need to be done. Arguably, at least the Proctor School roof is a direct result of the fact that the pandemic means those grant programs aren't gonna be there. So, staff has proposed that those the $3 million of those projects from the very beginning, that we should use ARPA. Now, if you don't use ARPA funding to pay as you go for those, the only alternative, because they're sort of those medium-sized projects, is you're gonna have to issue debt. And that means adding about $70 to the tax bill over 10-year bonds to pay for those projects. And we know we've got the fire station building project and some other large, we have the athletic complex at the high school. These are all things that are gonna add tax impact. So arguably, this is why we proposed these. They've been in the plan, they need to be done. Things got bunched up because of, the pandemic. We delayed some of these things, and we postponed other projects like the drainage and the sidewalk requests as well. So the Board of Selectmen has not made any decisions, but we're kind of at the point now where we can't put a capital budget together or an operating budget until the board makes a decision on ARPA. So I'm putting a memo together to them, just updating them on where things stand. But we'll need to make a decision at one of their upcoming meetings. What are we doing? Because these have to get done. They're unavoidable. And if we're not gonna pay cash for them, because we're sitting on $4.5 million, then we're gonna have to finance them, which means going to town meeting and asking for authorization to issue debt. So if, on the other hand, we use the $3 million of ARPA money to take these middle projects out, then we're left back with cruiser replacements and things that we arguably can handle with the free cash that's left over, and the large projects like the fire station, which we were always going to have a debt exclusion and debt issued for. If we don't, it's gonna cause things to jam up, and it's just gonna add to the tax bill. If you remember, on December 15th at the Financial Trend Monitoring meeting, we showed you forecasted debt impacts or tax impacts. And a big part of the reason for the escalating tax bill was we made assumptions that these projects have to be bonded. So that is before the board. At some point, this committee may want to weigh in on that. The other thing that I would say is we have other capital needs. So if you use the $3 million for those projects that I just indicated, the Proctor School roof, the fire engine replacement, and the DPW tight tank compliance, that leaves about $1.3 million still in ARPA funds. Well, what are the other things that we talked about that we might potentially need? Well, we have a downtown master plan that is looking for design monies for phase one so they can get grants. That's about $250,000. We have a backlog of sidewalks and complete street projects that we want to do. And then we also have drainage work. You heard about a couple culverts, Assabet Hill, so drainage work that really should be funded. So if a good chunk of that 1.3 was put towards, the first phase of the downtown master plan, which is the #1 priority of the master plan that came out of the master planning process. The second priority was sidewalks and complete streets. So we recommend money for that. And then the third is, we have drainage issues that need to be addressed. We don't have money in fiscal 2024 capital budget at the moment for drainage. So that would be another good use. And so even if you did that, you could structure it so that there's still some funding left to do things, other recommended things like, a staffing study. There may be some funding that's requested to continue to carry the White Cliffs building while we work through the bid process for that, because we have a proposal to take over White Cliffs. But anyway, I'm going to put a memo together, updating the Board of Selectmen, really sort of emphasizing that we need to make decisions on this, because you're not going to be able to do your job as a committee to put a capital budget together until we know what the disposition of at least these 3 projects are. So those are the projects that must be addressed now for fiscal 2024. The projects that aren't in fiscal 2024 but are important still are drainage, sidewalks, downtown master. So those are in the capital plan in out years. It'd be great to take a swipe at those, take a chunk out of those, get a head start in this fiscal year, and then next year, we try to get on that funding of every year or every other year to get on a solid funding plan. So that's an option for ARPA, use of those ARPA funds as well. But again, this doesn't go to town meeting, this doesn't go before your board or committee or appropriations. By virtue of the way the ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act funding was released, they wanted every town to be able to use it immediately to deal with needs surrounding the pandemic. So the authorization rests with the Board of Selectmen. But again, one of the things we've stressed to the board is we have all these plans that have gone through elaborate planning, like the master plan was done over 18 months with surveys and focus groups. So those priorities, again, are downtown, sidewalks, complete streets. We've got lots of projects that have been added and stacked up. Arguably, ARPA funds would be a great source for that. Again, the things during the pandemic, one of the things that we pushed off was drainage projects. $300,000 worth of drainage projects have been pushed off. It'd be nice to get back on track with those as well. So something for you to think about as the Board of Selectmen will take this up at an upcoming meeting. I think it's important for the other boards and committees, if you have thoughts on how that money should be spent, that you make those thoughts known.
So, this is the stuff that's aggravated me and concerned me the most, is the ARPA funds, where we can't, I guess we can comment, doesn't mean anyone will listen, but there's a handful of things I'd really, like explained to us. I just don't know if we'd be wasting our time. Giving money to basically a charity, giving money to individuals where there was plenty of opportunities. It seems that there's a lot of things here that might not. I'd be curious if, the selectmen would take input from boards and committees and come and explain, for instance, I'll pick on the $500,000 to businesses. The government threw billions of dollars at businesses. There's tons of money available. You can go online and see who actually got it. I can see where that particular item could be missed. I'm a small business, I don't want anything, didn't ask for anything, didn't take anything. Friends of the Senior Center, that's a charity. There seems to be a trail. There's other funding resources we can use to do a trail. There seems to be,
So
this doesn't seem to be the most.
If I may, Mike, just so we're clear about what we're referring to, so at the October 14th meeting of the Board of Selectmen, Selectman Hirsch and Selectman Cohen, from the point at which I gave that July memo, which was a snapshot in time, and some of those needs have changed, they wanted to, as many communities did, go out, ask the public how they thought we should spend the money. They have that input. This is nothing more than a compilation of comments from that public input. The intent is to now go through and focus on what are we actually going to fund. So that's where I'm coming from, in that I want to draw attention to the fact that we have direct needs directly related to the pandemic, capital needs that were postponed, and capital needs that, if we don't use ARPA funding for, is going to result in significant tax impact. So to be fair, the board hasn't prioritized any of these. They haven't really discussed them. My point is, we're sort of at the stage where we're out of time. We need to make some decisions, at least about the immediate projects that are going to go to town meeting and be requested for debt service. If we're not going to issue debt service, then let's get them out of the queue. Let's fund them with ARPA. The longer we wait on these things too, you're seeing significant price escalation. So there's price escalation as well as delay. So when you go back to when we recommended the purchasing of the fire engine, which a number of communities around us actually used ARPA funding for, that engine was $800,000. Well, now it's $900,000, and it's a 2-year wait. So, you know, I get, we want to have a thorough process, and I understand that, but we, at this point, without the board making decisions on these projects, we're not going to be able to put a capital budget together. So, and I believe their intent is in one of the next meetings to take this up, but also at that point, I think it's helpful if, you know, the chair takes comment on everything on the agenda. So board or committee members have thoughts either as a body or as individuals. You know, it's important that, that they receive that along with the other, you know, public input that they receive. But clearly there's a number, when you have residents coming up with suggestions, they don't, they may not be aware that we already have programs or funding sources for some of the things that they're suggesting. I'm always hesitant, when you ask the public for input, I'm always hesitant to do that without providing context. And without the context, you're gonna get people making, if they don't know what you're already doing or already planning to do, you're gonna get a lot of duplication of effort. But be that as it may, there's, you know, it's important to know what the community is interested in. But I'll just come back to the fact that we went through an 18-month planning process with the master plan development about what this community wants. And these funds, in my opinion, the best bang for your buck outside of dealing with vaccinations and immediate needs is investments in your infrastructure and your buildings that will enhance your financial condition 5 years from now, as opposed to spending it on new programs, staffing, or service enhancements that you're not going to be able to sustain in out years. So, again, I think there's enough money here to touch all the bases, but we need to make some decisions in order to be able to put together the warrant for town meeting and to put together a capital budget. So,
John, is there a drop dead date that the Board of Selectmen need to make a decision on this ARPA funds, given the financial process and the town meeting? Is there?
I'd say
February, March, I mean.
yes, by one of the next couple of meetings, they need to take this up. Because the warrant's getting put together, the capital budget's getting put together, and the reality is, look, if we're not going to fund these projects with ARPA funding, then we may postpone cruisers or, you know, some other equipment replacements to try to knock down the $3 million cost so that we're not financing $3 million, and maybe something slightly less than that. But again, all we're gonna do is exacerbate this bubble of capital that we've seen emerge out of, you know, a result of the pandemic. So rather than see the bubble get bigger and the problem get worse, we have an opportunity to deflate that bubble and kind of get back on track and do some great capital projects, but get back on track and start doing some enhancements with sidewalks and drainage and some of this other stuff. So that's, you know, kind of where things are with the board.
Can the feds claw this money back if we don't do anything with it?
There's always a threat of that, and there's been comments, threats of that, which is why you see the state has been spending. You know, there's time limits too. You know, you need to spend these funds, or you will lose them. So we're not in that. That's not an issue for us yet. The bigger issue is that, again, we can't move through this next cycle of operating in capital budgets without knowing what are we doing on, particularly on, it's $3 million worth of projects. We're either using the ARPA or not. That decision's got to get made in the next couple of weeks. Otherwise, you know, again, my whole operating budget, debt budget, is going to assume that we're issuing debt now, which I have to carry on my side of the budget, you know, which means I'm going to have to cut something else out of the town side of the budget. So that's just where we are. But, so there's 3 immediate projects, and then we arguably have a little bit more time to talk about some of these other things. But again, just outside of the upcoming capital budget, in the plan are, you know, all this backlog of sidewalks that need to be done, the drainage projects that you've heard about. You know, in my opinion, you know, those are long-established needs that have been part of a plan. You kind of want to start with those and then talk, those are things you need, and then talk about things that maybe you'd like to have. But again, I think there's enough money in there to touch all the bases. But we need to move forward, I guess, is where we're at right now. So I'm anticipating the board is going to take this up at their next meeting, or the meeting, well, February's it, because the budget's done, so we need to make some decisions on this stuff.
Mr. Chair, so just to expand a little bit on John's response to John regarding the timing. 2 years for a fire truck. There's an expenditure requirement for the ARPA funds, and you can't pay for a truck that you don't have yet. So if the money needs to be spent by December of 2025, you don't have a lot of time to get this truck in order, so you can pay for it, and it's commissioned and on the road. So some projects, the time is now. Others, like sidewalks, not so much, but equipment is a very long lead.
Yep.
I'm as aware of it as the fire chief is.
Thank you.
The big one, you know, the school, we've gotten a formal official communications from the school department that Proctor School is it. They want ARPA money spent to deal with that roof. That roof can't wait any longer. Just the accelerated repair program by the Massachusetts School Building Authority is designed to help communities replace roofs, windows, boilers in schools, right? It used to be 25 years for a roof. Now they had so many projects, they made it, roof has to be at least 30 years old, regardless of the shape it's in. Now they're saying, even if it's 30 years old, we're not doing them this year, and we're not doing them next year either. So you're gonna have to figure out. And right behind that roof is the Z School roof. So, you know, we're gonna have to knock one of those roofs off and eat it on our own as a community, and then we'll be back in the queue again for that next roof. But again, it's directly related to the pandemic. That's why they've suspended the grant program. So, but that roof cannot wait. It will not wait. The school committee is very clear about it needs to be done at this town meeting. So if it's not ARPA funds, it's gonna be debt. And again, if you finance the $3 million worth of projects, it's gonna add somewhere between $60, $70 to the average tax bill for over 10 years. So.
Okay.
And that was the thrust of my discussion at the trend monitoring. Once again, the whole point of this is we want people to have good information to make an informed decision about, you know, if you do this, this is gonna be what happens. If you do that, this is what happens. We can tell you, as Scott showed you, if you give us $100,000 or $200,000, what the sidewalk conditions will be in 5 years. So we have the great data. We need to marry it to a funding source. So,
Okay,
all right.
thank you very much. Next item is review the meeting schedule.
So if you look at the very back of your packet, the last page is a draft of the schedule. So your next meeting, so you're meeting Thursdays. One question that I have is, do we want to meet at 7 PM or 6 PM? I don't know if that's an issue. At one point, we were meeting earlier. Doesn't matter to me. I'm here for the duration, but.
Might be an issue for Bill or Tom, I don't know.
I mean, I like 7,
7
Yeah.
works for me.
get home, eat, and then come.
So for some reason, if you look at the Thursday 2/9, it says 6 PM, that should say, no, that date was requested if we could do it at 6 because the superintendent's coming in. So he's asking if we could do that meeting at 6. I know that throws everybody off.
I like 6, but whatever. It's up to you.
So just to
Far
go,
enough, guys.
It's far enough out there, that's fine.
yep, just to go through the schedule, so tonight, you know, we did the free cash, the DPW update, we talked about ARPA funds, and then, meeting schedule. Your next meeting would be, the preliminary capital budget, to review, so all the projects that potentially would go to town meeting. Police chief, capital projects, and the fire, chief's capital projects would come in, for discussion next week. On 2/9, we would have DPW coming in with his upcoming projects, water and sewer as well, the school department, and we had tentatively requested the Community Preservation Act to come in for the projects that they think are coming up. That's the only one that still needs to be confirmed. Then Thursday, February 16th, would be review of the capital budget and a discussion of the committee's recommendations and draft report. And again, just for the viewers at home, so that people understand how this works, is we have a 6-year capital improvement plan. So every year, projects move up a year. What we refer to as the capital budget are the projects that are going to the upcoming town meeting. Everything else is on a planning basis, but in general, each year, the projects move up, new projects get added into the last year. So 9 times out of 10, unless it's an emergency or we got a grant that we can jump on, this body has heard about a project and discussed it for 5 years before it gets funded. So we don't need to spend a long time talking about a piece of equipment that we've talked about for 5 years running, which is why this process works so well. So all the projects that are before you are ones that have been in the plan for multiple years and have moved up. Like, I'll give a perfect example. When the police chief and the fire chief come in to talk about their capital projects, they're not just talking about the projects that are going to town meeting this year. They talk about every project that they have for the next 6 years. And that gets updated every year. And I know you guys know this. I'm speaking to folks at home that think, well, how can they do this in 4 or 5 meetings? It's because that project has been discussed for at least 5 years before it's on deck for funding. Same thing with all of Scott's projects. You know, things move around a little bit. We get updated pricing, and sometimes when we get a grant, those are the ones like the SCADA, $500,000, poof, out of the plan, because we got a grant for it. That's great. But we'll be discussing, when you meet with each department, every project that they have for the next 6 years, including the ones that are going to town meeting, just so people understand that. February 16th, we'll be discussing your recommendations in your report. This isn't required of this committee, but I always want to make sure that you are clear about this on March 27th. In accordance with the charter, that's a joint meeting between appropriations and the Board of Selectmen. That's the public hearing on the operating budget. Obviously, part of the operating budget is any projects that are being financed and capital projects are part of it. And then last but not least, town meeting. We'll meet before town meeting, as we always do, on Monday, April 24th, and that's at the high school. So that's your schedule. Again, it's every Thursday for the next 4 or 5 Thursdays, and we should be able to wrap up.
Very good.
We may see, again, I've slotted people in and confirmed. I think all of these have been confirmed with the exception of community preservation. So they're all locked in. That will be your schedule. Okay? That's all I have this evening. No other business to come before the committee unless you folks have something. Just one thing I would just raise for you. I've been sending you the information on the bid process for the White Cliffs. This morning at 9 a.m., the committee met and they chose the preferred, most advantageous project, which is the Metro West Affordable Housing Project. That's the one that they're recommending to the Board of Selectmen to move forward. So again, I have forwarded you all the information as it becomes available. And at some point, we can spend some time talking about that project if you would like, but you have all the information at this point. So, I know it's your favorite project, Mike, so we're just trying to this has been a long process, trying to come up with a private sector partner who will, preserve the building. Absent one of these proposals moving forward and being viable, we really don't have a plan. We're already on Plan C. So without one of these projects moving forward, unless the town wants to spend, upwards of $10 or $15 million to renovate the building and preserve it for some unknown use, this is the best way for us to preserve the building without putting an undue burden on the taxpayers, so.
Mr. Chairman, motion to adjourn?
All in favor?